Hello and welcome to Hawkeye Nation. This is Hawkcast, your Iowa football, basketball, and recruiting podcast brought to you by Go Iowa Awesome and Rivals.com. I'm your recruiting analyst and host, Eliot Clough, at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined by publisher Adam Jacoby and managing editor Ross Binder here on this Friday episode. And boy, oh boy, another first round exit for Fran McCaffery and the Iowa Hawkeyes falling to Ohio State last night. 7 seed falls to the 10 seed, 90-78. And it was a close first half, but the second half things really opened up. I'm curious, before we dive too much into um, analysis for the whole game, I tweeted something towards the end, and I'm wondering if it came through on TV and if you were feeling this way as well, Ross. I tweeted, this has the strong feeling like the end of a high school or middle school blowout. Everybody has wanted this game to be over for the last 5 minutes, and we're still here. Ohio State just called timeout. Did it feel like that to you guys too?
Yeah, that was a great point, Elliot. Definitely the end of that game, it just the last, 4 or 5 minutes, I think, definitely hit a point where uh, the outcome was obvious. Ohio State was going to win, and it definitely felt like both teams are going through the motions for the most part. Iowa, for sure, I would say. And yeah, it was just we needed that sim to finish button to get us to the final buzzer because yeah, those last 4 or 5 minutes, there was nothing of value there on the basketball court.
Adam, did that come through on TV?
Yeah, it did. And I think a big part of that was just that um, actually, it's a interesting parallel to last year when, again, Iowa lost to Ohio State in its first game in the Big Ten tournament, even though Ohio State was the lower seed last year, too. That game was a 4-point loss, but last year, neither team could really get a run going. Like every time the game was within, or every time the game reached two possessions, the other team would score last year. And this year, I mean, we saw how much Iowa fans can transform the Target Center, turn it into Carver North. But in a game like this, where Iowa could not string together a run of more than 4 points for the last 15 minutes of the game, and the only time that it was even five was once in the second half. Nothing at six. No. Like if you can't string together a run, if you can't string together stops, there's really no opportunity for the fans to get into it. And when the fans spend the entire second half on their duffs, maybe clapping, but never really getting ramped up. And we know how Iowa fans can get ramped up. Yeah, it just sort of feels like right? I mean, sort of a wasted evening. So yeah, it absolutely came through, and credit to the announcers for trying to um, keep fans and viewers into it. But it was just not that entertaining of a game, and that's just because it was just never close.
I think Ross nailed it. Must win turns into ho hum in his post win or post game article. And for that reason, Ross, I'm going to turn to you first on analysis. There are a couple things that stood out to me that I included in my post game article, but what what were the key things from this one that stood out to you as to why Iowa, well, everything got ho hum for them towards the end?
Yeah, I mean, I think you really nailed it in your recap too, and I was just kind of emphasizing what you said. But the big things were that perimeter shooting in the first half. Ohio State was just red hot. They went 8 of 11 from three. Iowa just could not kind of get out on the perimeter and defend them tight enough. So that kind of dug that early hole. And then the second half, you know, as Adam said, Iowa couldn't score more than 4 points in a stretch, and they had opportunities because Ohio State really cooled off from the field in the second half. Like they were just scorching hot in the first half. They cooled off big time in the second half, but it didn't matter because Iowa got even colder from the field in the second half and was just continually unable to take advantage of getting the lead to about 7-8 points, and they could never they just couldn't get a few more buckets, a few more stops, and get it closer, get it to 3, get it to 2, or even tie the game. And, just those chances when, they had an opportunity maybe to, make a shot, make a 3, get a bucket in transition, something to, maybe get the crowd going, get it a little bit tighter, get some confidence flowing. And they could not make those plays that they needed to make to, give themselves a real chance. And I think that's what did them in. And then Jamison Battle also literally killed them in the second half. He had 21 of his 23 points, I believe, after halftime. He was excellent for Ohio State, and Iowa had no counter for that for sure. So that was what it was. It was a very dispiriting loss, but it was also a very familiar loss with a lot of the same flaws, a lot of the same issues that we've seen from this team all season. So I entered that game as an underdog. The Vegas thought they would lose. I think a lot of Iowa fans were pessimistic about their chances based on the Big Ten tournament history and also the way this team has played. They had some wins down the stretch, but they were not good against Illinois on Sunday, and unfortunately that performance did seem to carry over a bit to yesterday's game too. And that's why we're talking about it this morning the way we are. So Adam, what did you see from watching it at home?
Well, if anything, you have undersold what Jamison Battle did to Iowa, although I can't literally kill them he would be in prison for that. But this would be the basketball equivalent of that because if anything, you undersold it. 23 points, all of them after halftime. He only went 0 for 1 for 0 points, as many points as I scored all game long. And then second half, Iowa had no answer for him and often didn't even really look all that prepared for what he could do on offense. So, some of it was just that I think the Iowa defense was reacting to the torrid shooting from downtown that Ohio State had in the first half, right? You want to shut that off first. Because, if the other team is hitting over 2 points per shot from the outside, that's not going to work. So obviously you have to try to stem that tide first. But if it comes at the expense of keeping any wraps at all on Battle, all you're doing is just choosing the way that you lose and giving up 23 points in the second half and making Battle look like some cross between an All-American and Caitlin Clark. That's not the way to do it either. He was doing it on the interior. He was shooting from the perimeter. I mean, he could do it all last night. And Ross, you're absolutely right. It's a familiar refrain, not only for some of the games that Iowa's played this year, a lot of games that Iowa's played this year, but for the season as a whole. OSU went up 10-2. Iowa just was playing catch up the whole way through. Never took a lead or anything like that. And you look at how Iowa played this season, and never was in line for a tournament spot. 0-3 to start the Big Ten season, and dug their way back. And kudos to them. And for as much as this podcast is going to be like, yeah, it was same old. Iowa does deserve some credit for getting this back to a 10-10 season. And Fran McCaffery's Iowa teams are typically great at, not taking an entire year off or letting a bad start doom them the whole way. So some credit is due for that. But they, just like they never took the lead in this game, they never got above 500, I believe, in the Big Ten. Or if they did, it was not by much. And that is sort of typical of how this team operates. You dig a hole, you try to dig yourself out, you work extra hard to do that. And then in the last 5 minutes, there's nothing left in the tank. And so, Ross, you detailed all those times in the second half especially even in road games where Iowa had the lead, could not hold it, ended up losing. And you can look at that and say that's a cause for optimism, especially with how young this roster was and how many of these key pieces are coming back, that they were that close to, I mean, really challenging for a Big Ten title. Or you can say that is a pattern that never corrected itself. And there's got to be some way for the coaches to figure out how to get that consistency back in the mix for the Hawkeyes, because right now it's not there and really wasn't there all year. And the issue with this team has never been talent. It has never been whether or not Fran McCaffery knows how to, coach his system or X's and O's and this and that. It was consistency. And that sort of goes for a lot of teams in the Big Ten this year, and why a lot of them are going to end up in the NIT. They're capable of playing good teams. They're capable of beating good teams. They just don't show up to do it every time. And that is a great way to end up at 18 and 14, and hoping that the women's NCAA basketball schedule allows you to host at least one game at Carver Hawkeye in the NIT, because I'm not sure that that's going to be possible either. And that would be a bummer too for Iowa fans to see a team like this that really fought its way into March and then has to play the NIT on the road against teams like, I don't know, Robert Morris or whoever didn't make the bubble. That would be a little bit of a disappointment. And I'm not sure Iowa would put together much of a run in that scenario when, what is it that you're really playing for? But coming back to the point, this is a pattern, and we've been noticing it for years, Ross. Just like you mentioned in your article, like the refrain is familiar, and we can, try to figure out why that's been going on and this and that. But at some point, especially in this coming off season, it really does feel like Iowa needs to figure out how to stop making the exact same mistakes. Eliot, in all the post-game press conference and this and that, how much did the players or Fran talk about sort of breaking these cycles of, I mean, for lack of a better term, mediocrity?
I don't think they did. Ross, did you catch any of that?
No, not really.
Okay. Well, what I was going to say, Adam, is, what is consistent? Defense.
Mm-hmm.
No matter where you play, more often than not, defense provides consistency. Defense and rebounding. Two things this team frequently lacked all season and has frequently lacked, at least the defensive part. I can't speak too much to rebounding, but I am pretty positive the defense hasn't carried for a good portion of Fran McCaffrey's tenure in Iowa City. And with this team, you can't say that about Josh Dix, right? Clearly their best on-ball defender. But there's two possessions that immediately stick out to me about last night. First is, I think it was late in the first half, and it happened right in front of you, Ross, just a few seats down from me. There was a baseline out of bounds play where they found that guy with the big afro. I don't know what his name is. Big afro in the corner. And he was wide open. And what did Tony Perkins do to close out? He jogged. First thing I did is turn to Dallas Jones, who was sitting right next to me, and I said, that was like pickup. What the hell was that? And then there was another possession on the other end in the second half where Peyton just actively was not guarding anybody. He was standing on the block. And shot goes up from three. It's a miss. He doesn't find anybody to box out. They get the rebound and they get a putback. Like those are two possessions that very clearly stand out to me and are very telling of the whole game last night. Not only that, but Tony Perkins was beaten off the dribble consistently in the first half. And in Price Stanford's minutes in the first half, he was beaten off the dribble to the rim as well. These are things that consistently are happening, and that can't happen if you're going to win at the highest level, especially in the Big Ten, because coaches, players are going to see those places they can exploit you, and they're going to exploit you. Ohio State, as much as they've struggled throughout the season, have now won 6 of 7, including a win over number 2 Purdue on their home floor. And Jamison Battle, clearly one of he's a veteran. He's a guy who knows how to score. And when you give him opportunities to do that, he's going to do it. Bruce Thornton, a good player. Roddy Gale Jr., a good player. Felix Akpara had a nasty dunk last night. He played pretty well, 5 rebounds. Scotty Middleton couldn't miss in the first half, 3 of 3 from deep, finished with 11 points total. Also turned to Peyton Sanford and said, "You can't effing guard me," in the first half, which he couldn't.
Oh, it's tough when they're right, isn't it?
And so is like when the effort's there, I'll say that when the effort's there, they play decent defense, like good enough defense. Rotations, right? Like in the first however many minutes when they were down 10-2, they were flying around because they knew they had to, because they were missing shots. But then the offense starts to come along and we're fine. Well, spoiler alert, no, you're not. You lost by double digits. There was another play. One thing that you guys did both hit on is they couldn't get over that hump. And that's been a theme throughout the season too. And a lot of these losses, that 12 to 4 minute mark has determined whether or not they win. And that's been largely determined by, well, defense, like I just mentioned, and ability to string together runs. And I remember tweeting last night, I think they got it down to 7 at one point, and Josh Dix had a wide open 3-pointer that he hit the back of the rim on. And I tweeted, "Needed that Josh Dix 3-pointer," and immediately a bunch of people responded to it because there was just those moments, and it was similar against Illinois where it's like, let down. Like you can feel the fans' excitement start to grow. It's like, oh, they're almost in it. No, sorry, and that's definitely something that stuck out from last night. Adam, it looked like you had a point to make.
Yeah, there was one more sequence along those lines that really sort of jumped out to me. And this was when the when the game was starting to get a little bit away from Iowa, or at the very least, the time was really starting to become an issue. And it was under the 5-minute mark. So Tony Perkins had just dunked on a fast break, gets Iowa back within 9, which was probably the 5th or 6th time Iowa had been back within 9 at that point. And after a couple missed free throws by Ohio State, Iowa gets the ball before those missed free throws, Iowa gets the ball into Owen Freeman, tries to get a layup on the inside. Akpara gets a block on him, and it was a little bit, it was a physical play, but they called it a clean block. And OSU gets the rebound, and instead of coming back on defense, you see Perkins try to swipe the ball away, and it doesn't work, but he tries it again. And then tries it again, and finally the officials have no choice but to call him for a hack. And the Ross is already laughing. Ross,
that was right in front of me. It was literally right in front of me when that was happening. It's like, what are you doing, Tony? Just get back on defense.
Yeah, right. And that was one. Why are you committing that foul? The ball was not there to be stolen. It was Mahaffey was not going to come off it. It was pretty clearly a frustration foul. And, those happen. And that was a frustrating point in the game for Iowa. Tony Perkins is also supposed to be the senior leader. There's got to be some leadership by example here. And not only does that, let's just call it a dumb foul because that's what it was. Not only does that happen, OSU misses both free throws somehow. Perkins gets the defensive rebound, and then OSU gets the ball back. Peyton misses a 3, gets the ball back. Perkins gets the next defensive rebound, goes and commits a charge. And that was pretty much it for Iowa. Like that was playing on tilt. And that is just not really good on-court leadership at that point. That is letting mistakes, multiply and snowball. And that is really no way to put together the type of performance that gets you deep into these tournament runs. That is, you know, if you're a teammate, especially a younger teammate, like are you following that example or not? I mean, that's a serious question. Like, are you looking to him for, that leadership by example or not? And if you're not, who is the leader by example on this team? Like, it's probably Peyton Sanford, but is he that vocal leader too? Is
Yes.
he that guy?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. But it didn't seem to be enough on this team, like of those seniors and all that, because this team sort of looks a little bit rudderless, and it happens a lot. And there's only so much you can chalk that up to youth, especially in March. At some point, your leaders have got to lead. Ross, you had something?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Elliot's right. Peyton was a very vocal, very emotional leader, and when we could see it after the game last night for sure. But it wasn't connecting on the court with the play of everybody else for sure. Like that connection and that influence wasn't there. But I also thought what Elliot said about the defense really stuck out to me as well. Two items, about a little jogging on defense early in the game, and it's like, how can you be jogging on defense in a game that's must win? You have to win this game to have any shot at making the NCAA tournament. You have to have full intensity for 40 minutes, and they had intensity in spurts here and there, but that's the way they play this entire season, in spurts here and there. Good play for a little bit, and then lackadaisical play for long stretches. So that was frustrating to see. And then Eliot, you mentioned the defense and not always putting in the effort if the offense was going. And Tony, I thought, had a good quote after the game where he acknowledged that Iowa's offense is better when they play defense because they get stops, they get out into transition, and that's where that offense is so good, when they're in transition, when they're flowing and moving and getting easier shots. And yet they don't do enough consistently to play that way. They're not having that intensity on defense and getting those stops and getting into transition to make things easier for themselves on offense. So that, it's just like, you're walking the walk, but you're not talking the talk. You're talking, I don't know, maybe the other way around, but it's early, whatever. But they're not doing what they have to do essentially. So I'm going to shut up now.
Elliot, you remember that quote from Tony Perkins at the start of the season when he predicted that he was going to be all Big Ten or first team all Big Ten defense, right?
I don't remember
that. He said it in media day, and it sort of feels like like right on par with Brock Harding comparing himself to Ronald Acuna Jr. in retrospect, or the mix of Acuna and whoever else. Like it's that level of like, buddy, it's gotta you gotta prove it, and it just wasn't there with nearly enough consistency, and it's too bad because when Perkins is playing well, he is incredible. His capabilities were all Big Ten for the last, I would say, 2 or 3 seasons of his Iowa career. But the consistency was never there. And the leadership was never there. And it feels like a little bit of a missed opportunity. And yeah, that's tough. And it's tough for the team to, get over the hump when its, best players are not playing consistently enough. Like that, the NIT is where you land when that happens. Elliot, you've got something?
So I don't have this is totally the well, if I wasn't in media, I'd be coaching in me, and also totally my mother, in that I don't have a problem with not playing well so much as having an effort attitude down the end of the stretch of the game, and you could feel it from Tony. Um, in the locker room after the game, he did like I was the first one in of the media members that went into the locker room, and I saw Tony sitting there on his phone like this, and I was like, "Oh, not talking to you first." So I went right to Peyton, who was very clearly emotional, and I was going to go to Peyton anyway. But you could feel it. I'm sure you could too, Ross, from where we were sitting during the game. Maybe even on TV, you could see it. But it was like a season's over, game's over. I'm not happy about what's going on. Screw it. I'm gonna, it's 6 turnovers, kind of give you that idea a little bit too.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how many of those came at the end, but um,
Spring break on 3.
Cancun on 3. That I have more issue with that, especially as a senior. To me, that says he's not coming back as well. And that's a conversation we can have at another time. But that's what I have an issue with. And I was kind of surprised. What I was maybe not hoping for, maybe not expecting, but was see I saw a possibility of a Tony Perkins revenge game after going 1 of 10 against Illinois, right? And we just didn't get that. 3 of 8 from the field, 6 of 8 from the free throw line, and that's something we haven't talked about, but I did talk about in my post game article. And that Patrick referenced post game is that they were not good from the free throw line. In this game, 18 of 27. I think they shot 60 some percent from the free throw line, which is like you can't be Division I basketball players and shoot 60 something percent from the free throw line, especially when you're so focused on offense. When you're so focused on offense, part of that is getting to the free throw line. And if you're not making these essentially free points, whereas Jamison Battle, like that, I think that dude shoots like 90% from the free throw line. So you put him to the line, it's a bucket. Like it's 2 points.
He was 9 for 9 against Iowa.
Exactly. And it just didn't come together for Iowa. And I think the attitude there, and you could kind of feel it. You could feel it. You not kind of feel it. You could definitely feel it permeate through the rest of the team, except for Peyton. Peyton was the whole time, the whole game, full effort. But there's some study that like you bring in one negative person and it affects the morale or the output of the entire group. Some study like that, you know what I'm talking about. That they're like some office study. I don't know. Maybe I'm BSing that, but that's like what I saw last night. Whereas Peyton was doing all he could, and that kind of permeated from Tony, and then it's like, oh, the NCAA tournament's out of question, then we're done. And so that's probably what I had the biggest issue with. To to finish off here, because we know Ross has to get going. The conjecture on Twitter, the conversation on Twitter was about whether or not Fran McCaffrey is back next season. And a lot of that is centered around Darren DeVries, getting him from Drake, potentially Tucker DeVries from Drake as well, which if you can pull that off, assuming Fran is gone, if you can pull that off, I think that's a home run hire. I'm a huge Darren DeVries guy, especially covering Drake. Well, you and I and Drake for a couple of years. He's an excellent coach. Tucker's really good. But that is on Fran's volition. He's not going to get fired. Like, you think Beth Getz is going to fire Brian Ferentz and Fran McCaffery in the same year? One. And two, Fran is the all-time winningest coach in Iowa history. You don't fire that guy.
Yeah,
And
especially if you want to hire anybody else to replace him too. Coaches
exactly.
like you fire a guy like Fran, who in about 95% of coaches' eyes has earned something close to, one of the coldest seats in the Big Ten, especially at a school like Iowa. You fire him, And it's going to make the Dr. Tom curse look like play school. Like the vibes will be awful at that point. So no, he's not getting fired, period.
To add to that, the NBA level production from at Iowa and the ability to recruit and find good players like the Murrays, like Luka Garza, like Joe Wieskamp, and turn them into what they became is just another example of why he is a good coach. Now, I think I saw a conversation. It's either on our premium board, which if you haven't joined us, definitely do that. iowa.rivals.com/subscribe. Would love to have you. That's a full on conversation on our board right now about whether or not Fran is back or should be back next season. But somebody brought up and said he's a good, sometimes really good coach. He's not a great coach. In order to get yourself to that great level of status, you got to win in the postseason. And sure, he did it in 2022 with that Big Ten tournament team. But what happened next? They lost in the first round to Richmond. So I think that's pretty pertinent with Fran. And at Iowa, you kind of have to take good to very good because it's going to be hard to go get great.
Yeah, it's hard, and it's also sort of dependent on things that are a little bit tough to be able to predict. There's really no way to look at a coach and look at his resume, especially coming from a mid-major sort of situation, and say, yeah, that guy's going to string together March runs, or no, that's you know that's not going to happen. And there's a ranking of coaches by how they've performed in March. I think it's Bart Torvik that I mean he runs every ranking, but um, it sort of compares these coaches' records not only like from a raw perspective, but also like how they're expected to perform based on their seeding, based on their opponent, this that. And Fran is in I believe the bottom 10% of coaches in the last like 25 years. And yeah, it is tough to be considered a great coach when the March performance doesn't line up with anything great. I mean, we're still talking about Iowa's Sweet 16 drought, and that's been going on for Eliot about as long as you've been alive. So there's, on one hand, you can say it's probably not coach specific at that point. But two, you also sort of say whoever is able to break that drought is going to be beloved here. And this is another year that Fran McCaffery is not doing it. Now, that all said, it does take luck to advance in March Madness, and that doesn't make it illegitimate. Luck is a part of the game, especially in basketball. And Iowa's just really never been lucky in terms of who they're seeded against, like whether an upset happens, in the game opposite to them if they make it to the second round. Even when, like in like play-in games, they've gone against teams that also have just outsized like KenPom rankings relative to their seeds. Like they play tough teams, and I get it, and we have to acknowledge that. And it's also a little bit difficult to recruit elite talent to Iowa City, especially when they're not coming from Des Moines and Dowling and are changing basketball as we know it. Like Caitlin did sort of fall into Lisa Witter's lap a little bit, and the closest Fran's come to that is Keegan Murray. And Keegan, for as great as he's been, was never Caitlin Clark at Carver. So it is an uphill battle at Iowa, and it has been and probably will continue to be for as long as the program is in this state, for as long as they're playing at Carver, for as long as there's so many other things that take Iowa fan interest in this like winter/early spring. There's also wrestling, there's also women's basketball, there's also baseball. Like men's basketball is not automatically number one in Iowa City, and we've seen that fan apathy sort of bleed into the Carver Hawkeye like experience this year in particular, and that is hard to recruit to, especially when there's elite talent, especially when there's programs investing six figures and high six figures in their men's basketball talent. Like, it's easier to attract that high level talent when the fan support is more palpable than it is at Iowa. So I'm not saying it's all on Fran, and a drought can't last this long based off of one coach. It just can't. But it is incumbent on whoever's running all this to figure out how to get Iowa out of that rut. It's easier said than done. Right? It's simple, but it's not easy. But it really does feel like something needs to change here. I mean, do you guys agree with that?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think just running it back again is gonna, and expecting some different results is gonna be difficult. We've been in this cycle for a while now, and it really is just the March thing that has, hangs over Fran, because he's got the all-time wins record. He's got, in Big Ten play, they've been very consistently good to better, not quite very good, but I don't know, really good, however you want to use your modifiers there. But they've been in the top division of the Big Ten for, I think, 7 of the last 9 years. So extremely consistent performance during the regular season. But it is just, what did you do in March? And in the Big Ten tournament, Iowa has not been good outside of, they won it 2 years ago in 2022. And in 2021, they made the semifinal. Those are the only 2 times under Fran, which is now a stretch that is about 15 years, I think. Those are the only 2 tournaments in which Iowa's been playing on the weekend, when they made it past the Friday quarterfinals. And there's a lot more years where they were out in the first and second round on Thursday, essentially. Now the first round is on Wednesday, but whatever. And a lot of those first and second round exits, just like we saw this year. And, that hurts. And then the big one, of course, is the Sweet 16. Iowa has not made it under Fran, didn't make it under the 2 previous head coaches either. So, this problem stretches back a long time, like Adam mentioned. And, that is, you measure coaches on, what do they do in the dance? Do they make the Sweet 16? Do they make the Elite 8, et cetera? And, Fran, despite having some really good Iowa teams and some really good talent, I mean, Luka Garza, Keegan and Chris Murray, Joe Wieskamp, Jared Utoff, Aaron White, lots of really good guys, has not been able to get over that hump. There we go again with that. It's humps in all sense, and in the macro sense of the career and the season and the game, it's a continual issue, I guess. And I'm not sure what the issue is. Like Adam said, firing Fran is a non-starter. You're not going to do that with what he's established at Iowa, especially for a brand new AD. Like, that's not how you're going to start your tenure. So then I think it comes down to, what's Fran going to do? Is he going to decide he wants to keep doing this? His kids are gone now. We've had Connor or Patrick in the Iowa lineup for, I think, 6 consecutive years, something like that. No more of his sons. His youngest son, Jack, has already indicated he's not coming to Iowa. He's looking to go elsewhere. So that won't be a factor. So what does Fran want to do? Does he want to keep coaching? And does he do anything with his staff? He's been extremely loyal, and the continuity of the Iowa staff has been, significant. It's Ferentz-esque, really, in terms of the stability and consistency, outside of coaches retiring, like Kirk's, is it Spera? Terrible with name. Spera. He retired 1 or 2 years ago. I forget exactly when. But we have seen, the same assistants by and large since Fran started. So, but I think that's what it comes down to, is what's that the ball's in Fran's court here. What is he going to do? Is he going to keep going exactly as is, or change things up, or is he going to decide he's had enough right now? So we'll see. Adam, you had something there.
Yeah, it's and this isn't based off of any specific intel or anything like that. I don't want people to, read that the wrong way, but it really does seem like if there were an opportunity for Fran to make a break from this program on his terms, as clean as he wants it to be, this feels like the first opportunity in a while. And, it'd be his chance to sort of ride out on, you know, you can't say riding out on top, but he's had a great career, and it would be clearly, unmistakably his choice at this point for the reasons that we've already laid out. So whether or not that's an opportunity he wants to take advantage of, if he feels like this is sort of at an end, is, obviously going to be up to him. And and again, just to reiterate what he said here, there's zero doubt in my mind that Beth Getz would love to have him back, not only next season, but moving forward. And part of that is because you look at this team and they are really, they're not set up to go 11-22 next year, right? This team is not on the precipice of disaster by any stretch. This is a young team that will be losing a senior class that has really, really struggled with consistency. Like, if anything, and I'm not going to call the impending graduations addition by subtraction, but I would say that none of the guys that will be graduating this year are irreplaceable. And it will be possible and plausible for Fran to take the guys that are coming back, even if Peyton Sanford says time is now for the NBA, which is sort of an open question in and of itself. Even if he leaves, the guys that are going to be coming back, there's enough there to build another successful, 500 or better Big Ten team around, especially if these freshmen really make that step up in consistency, can really start to play good defense and take care of the basketball better than they have so far this year. That's, again, easier said than done, but that path does not seem all that complicated. So, Iowa would be better off if Fran came back than if he didn't. So let's be clear about that. But circumstantially, it really does feel like if he were eager to get out of Iowa City, here's his opportunity. So if he comes back, then I think Iowa should, and Iowa fans should feel pretty secure in what him coming back means, not only for him, for his staff, but for the players themselves too. But yeah, this really does sort of feel like an inflection point for the future of the program, and it could go a lot of different ways. Eliot, what's been your read of the, I guess for lack of a better term, the vibes around this staff and what the future holds?
I'll say this and then we'll get out of here. One thing that Fran said recently is that, well, he's talking about Tom Izzo and his longevity at Michigan State rather. And he said that Tom has, he gave him a bunch of praise, right? Said Tom isn't retiring anytime soon, and neither am I. Now, I don't know if that means that he's going to retire at Iowa. Maybe he's coaching somewhere else. Maybe Patrick McCaffrey went to enter the portal his last year. Maybe Fran wants to coach where Jack is going to play. Maybe that's even an assistant role. This is all just throwing ideas out there. Again, not reading into it too much. Or don't read into it too much, rather, because this is just throwing ideas out there. What I will say as well regarding the staff is that these guys would go to war for Fran. I'll say the same thing for the players.
Yep.
And this incoming 2024 class is really good. Chris Tajo is the athlete that everybody wants. Cooper Koch is the peak Iowa type of player that everybody wants. Attitude, shooting, like both of those things line up. Coop is going to be really good. Chris is going to be really good. I think next year will be defined by, one, whether or not Tony and Peyton come back, more so Peyton than Tony. And two, do you get what you want out of the portal this time? and I think I've referenced this before, you cannot have another Ben Krikke and Evan Braun's portal class because both provided value in different ways this year, but not the way you needed it. And you need something. You need something of substance out of the portal. And Krikke was that to a degree, but you got to have somebody that can score. You got to get somebody that can consistently play the point. You got to get somebody that plays defense, that can rebound. And ideally not out of, mid-major play, unless it's somebody that's gonna come in and be like that guy from North Dakota State who's played well at Alabama this year. I'm assuming he's played well. He was really good at North Dakota State. So I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but that's the way I see it, and we'll see if things shake out that way. Of course, we'll have all the coverage for you on iowa.rivals.com, especially premium content. We'll be following along with the portal, having as much intel as we can there, and then of course with recruiting and such as well. So we'll wrap it up here on this episode of Hotcast. We appreciate you tuning in to this episode. If you are not a premium subscriber yet, again, you can do that at iowa.rivals.com/subscribe. If you're listening on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button, drop a like, drop a comment. Let us know what you're thinking. Do you want Fran back next year? Is he back next year? Two totally different questions. What do you think? And who else should they go and get in the portal? What is determined next season by who they bring back? Again, if you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, leave a rate and review. You might be listening and not be subscribed, so make sure you do that as well. Hit that subscribe button. We appreciate it. It makes us very happy. For now, I am Eliot Clough at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined by Adam Jacoby and Ross Binder, and we will see you next time.